Hello.
Hello, hello. Nice to
Hello,
see you.
hello. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Shall we start? Okay. So we here at Polyvagal Trauma and Addiction Group are really delighted to welcome Joann Lutz. Joann's a social worker and she is the developer of nervous system informed trauma sensitive yoga. So probably lots of people here practice yoga and that brought you here. I know Natty does. Lots of people. Yeah. So Joann has been training mental health professionals internationally for 10 years, as well as offering a certification program. And she is the author of a book that came out in 2021 called Trauma Healing in the Yoga Zone. And I think, didn't Steve write something, an endorsement or a foreword or something to your book,
Yeah,
Steve Porges?
He did. It was a review.
A review. Beautiful. Yeah. So before we forget, because this is important for people to connect with you afterwards, what is your website address?
www.yogainpsychotherapy.com.
Okay. And maybe Annette, could you put that in the chat so people can connect? And if you want to reach out and find out more about Joann and her work.
It really applies to more than psychotherapy. It applies to yoga therapy, yoga teaching, affiliated professions like physical therapy and occupational therapy, coaching, so.
Yeah, so a broad spectrum. Well, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. So you're going to share with us about half an hour, 40 minutes or so. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. And Annette is our amazing tech person. Like, thank you, Annette, because like you do a lot of work for us around this and the still very problematic, whatever you call that posting thing that we have that's still not working properly. And we ask for your patience around all that. We're trying to make it better. But here we are, and Annette does a lot to help with that. So very appreciative of that. Do you want to just share then how we want people to interact in terms of Q&A and chat and whatever?
Yeah, so we're going to ask you to keep your questions until the end, and then you'll have a couple ways to ask questions. We'd invite you to raise your hand with the raised hand function that you'll see under reactions, which is the smiley face. So you can raise your hand and then we'll call on you, and then we'll also take questions via the chat. So if you prefer to ask your question that way, you can type it out and we'll read them out at the end. You can feel free to ask your questions in the chat during the presentation if you want to capture it before you forget, but we'll take them at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, here. So I appreciate your invitation to share my work in yoga and trauma with you all. And I hope you're in a comfortable place, in a chair or on a couch, because we're going to be doing a little bit of yoga as I continue talking. So I found classical yoga to be a very helpful adjunct in working with traumatized people. My first client was myself. I experienced much healing from my new yoga practice in 1970 while recovering from a major depression when I was getting out of college. Since the 1980s, I've wanted to bring it into my psychotherapeutic work with clients, but I hesitated because it seemed outside of my scope of practice. Fortunately, yoga was officially validated as a valuable adjunct to trauma treatment in the early 2000s by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and his staff with their development of trauma-sensitive yoga. Its power was further clarified for me in the next few years through its resonance with somatic experiencing, the work of Peter Levine, and of course, with polyvagal theory. I've created a model that goes beyond trauma-sensitive yoga, consciously incorporating elements which regulate the autonomic nervous system, which I call nervous system informed trauma-sensitive yoga, or NITYA for short. In this approach, clients who have difficulty feeling and identifying their body sensations can benefit from practices which help them to further develop interoception, which is an awareness of their inner experience. And once they are in touch with that, yogic self-help tools can help them to regulate their own autonomic nervous system, potentially increasing their sense of security and independence, and finding the courage to continue their recovery when things get tough. These tools can also help the therapist to guide the client on the path of gradual nervous system re-regulation. So, in my study of yoga as an autonomic nervous system regulator, I found that many yogic interventions focus on stimulating the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body, and the only cranial nerve which operates below the neck. As you may know from polyvagal theory, it influences the entire autonomic nervous system. In this talk, I'll describe a few of the correspondences that I found and teach you a few regulating yoga poses and breathing practices. So we're going to shift into our first experiential exercise to notice the points of contact between the back of your body and the chair or the couch that you're sitting on. This awareness can increase interoception, which stimulates the parts of the brain which connect body and mind. And it also helps to switch the brain from the unconscious default mode network to a more conscious form of attention, which can generally strengthen attentional control over time. So as you experience the contact between the back of your body and the chair or the couch, what do you notice? Now I'm asking these questions just for you to consider inside of your own experience. And now if you shift your awareness for a moment to your breathing practice, your breathing flow, you can notice what that's like right now. Silently witnessing the inhale and the exhale, not trying to change it, but noticing if it changes on its own. And why don't you try that for 2 or 3 breaths? Experiencing the inhale and exhale exactly as they are. And at the bottom of the next exhale, you can let the breath return to normal. This simple alternation of inhale and exhale stimulates the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system alternately over and over, helping to bring balance to these 2 branches. This simple practice can also enhance the brain's ability to regulate and integrate its functions. So you can let go of the breath awareness and the awareness of sensations now. And I'm going to show you a few diagrams, just in case you're not familiar with the whole world of polyvagal theory and autonomic nervous system regulation. So I'm going to shift into screen sharing mode now. So excuse me for a minute. So this is the window of tolerance diagram developed by Daniel Siegel, which shows the pattern of a regulated autonomic nervous system, which is also reflected in the heartbeat and the breathing pattern. The sympathetic arousal peaks at the top of this wave, which is also the top of the inhale, and the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest function, is most active at the bottom of the wave, which is the bottom of the exhale. When the arousal is within this window, which is defined by those two horizontal lines, the individual can feel connected to themselves, to the environment, and to those around them. They're able to stay present and regulated. So in the next diagram, we show how the pattern is changed when the person receives a traumatic shock. The window of tolerance is still there with the horizontal lines, and the original smooth pattern of arousal is in the background. But now you can see that the current arousal goes outside of the boundaries of the window of tolerance, possibly exposing the client to feelings of anxiety and panic when the line or the arousal goes above the window, and feelings of dysthymia or depression below the window, which is the dorsal vagal shutdown area. The yogic interventions can help re-regulate the system, either in the moment as yoga first aid, or as a sustained program to help the client change habitual patterns of reactivity, which includes addiction. And the therapist can help with that. Someone who is comfortable teaching simple yoga poses and breathing practices. And once the autonomic nervous system is re-regulated, trauma processing with any of these established therapeutic modalities can be most effective. So I see this yoga as an adjunct to some kind of trauma therapy or addiction treatment, which will prepare the person to get the most out of their therapy. In my love of yoga, I've created my own version of the window of tolerance. And this is part of it. It's the first section. There's 4 sections. And so what I have noted here is, you can see the basic outline of the window of tolerance with the 2 dotted lines as the boundaries of the comfort area in the client's nervous system. And in the over-arousal zone, where the sympathetic nervous system is overactive, you find the sympathetic nervous system dysregulation on the physical level. And below the window of tolerance, there's the dorsal vagal shutdown, freeze or dissociation area. And in this process that I teach, the therapist and the client can do different yogic interventions to slowly bring those polarities closer and closer together toward the center of that window of tolerance, so that eventually these physical dysregulations become regulated. And that is described in the gold bar in the center of the diagram over on the right side. So rather than calling it the window of tolerance, I wanted to honor the effect that yoga can have on the nervous system. So I changed the name to the Yoga Zone. So welcome to the Yoga Zone today. So yoga works with the autonomic nervous system on 3 levels. The physical level, which most people think of as yoga. The energetic level, which interpenetrates the physical. And the elemental level, which describes an ontological level of reality. It's like a conceptual level of reality. And I'm going to be explaining them more now. On the physical level, the eye movements, postures, and breathing practices can be very effective in regulating the autonomic nervous system in several ways. The eyes can help the individual to orient to their environment as they scan for danger or safety. If safety is found, the vagus nerve can prompt the lungs to breathe a sigh of relief, which is regulating, and can promote an openness to social engagement, which is the fruit of a regulated autonomic nervous system.
Can I pause you for a second?
Sure.
Would it be possible to zoom in a little bit? I know you wanted to keep it not in screen, but some people are having trouble seeing. I wonder if
I
you
see.
might do a bit of.
Yes. Is that better?
I think so, yeah.
I think that's about as much as I can do that, but I'm glad you suggested it. Do you see it? Is it larger?
Yeah, it's much larger. Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's see where I was. Okay. So in addition to this benefit of using the eyes for orienting for safety, the body worker Stanley Rosenberg has found in his work that specific eye movements align the vertebrae in the neck, which can increase the supply of blood to the brain and influence the individual's autonomic nervous system state. This is very fascinating to me to see how subtle changes can have such a large effect on autonomic nervous system regulation. So we're not going to do his exercise right now, but we're going to try a simple orientation exercise with the eyes. So I'd like to suggest that you look around the room, letting your eyes go where they want to go, and not trying to control their movements. Just notice what your eyes want to do and what they may focus on or land on. Noticing the breath for a moment. Going back to the eyes. In addition to promoting regulation, it's a great screen break for your eyes. So I'm wondering what that's like for you, just to inquire inside yourself. As for me, it's very calming. It feels there's a kind of subtle pleasure to connecting with the physical objects in the environment, in my experience. So we're moving on from the eye movements now to various yoga poses that engage the vagus and other cranial nerves, contributing to the physiological basis for social engagement. These nerves control the movement of the muscles in the face, the jaw, neck, and tongue, the movement of the eyes and head, the sound of the voice, the acuity of hearing, the breathing patterns, the heartbeat, and other functions. Variables such as the shape of the yoga pose, the pace at which it's taught, and the intensity of the effort used in assuming and maintaining it are all factors which influence autonomic nervous system regulation. And they can be used skillfully by the therapist or yoga teacher to achieve the desired effect in the autonomic nervous system. And so what I've done is I've created different grids that are in the book that help a therapist who's not a yoga teacher to choose the best posture based on those factors for a particular person with a particular level of arousal. So I chose chair yoga to facilitate this approach because I thought it would be the easiest form of yoga to fit into a conventional therapy office in case that's where you're working. Let's see. So I'm wondering how you experience your nervous system state right now. How you would describe it, if you are slightly sympathetically activated or relaxed and calm, lethargic, or something else. And once you identify it, you can use these postures that I'm going to teach to help shift your state if you want to, or to increase the balance that you already feel in your body, in the nervous system. So I'd like to work with you teaching two postures, focusing on shapes that regulate different branches of the autonomic nervous system. Remember, though it's very unlikely, that if you should become dizzy or lightheaded or feel any pain in any of these practices, please discontinue them. And you can mention it in the chat or mention it to me privately after the lecture. So again, we're getting ready to do a yoga pose. You can assume a comfortable seated position. Notice if your feet touch the floor or not. And if they don't, you can perhaps slip a little pillow or underneath your feet. Okay, so we're going to be starting with a basic seated pose with your palms on your thighs or your knees and your feet on the floor. Again, notice points of contact between the back of your body and the chair and the natural flow of your breath. But I'm not suggesting that your back should be leaning against the back of the chair. You could be sitting with your back straight, in which case there wouldn't be any contact. So we're going to start with a chair cobra pose. You can begin to arch the back, feeling the shoulder blades moving closer to each other toward the center of the back and the muscles around them tightening. You may find your head and neck rising an inch or two to adjust to the new position. It's not necessary to have your head tilted all the way back, but rather in a gentle curve, which follows the shape of the spine. And if it's comfortable, you can hold this position for 3 breaths, keeping your awareness on your body sensations and your breathing pattern. At the bottom of the 3rd exhale, whenever that happens, you can release the pose, gently straightening the spine, and you can slowly roll your head around back and forth to break up any tension that might have formed there. So the chair cobra pose is generally a sympathetic nervous system activating shape. And this is shown in the conscious extension of your spine, which requires energy and focus. The opportunity for a deeper inhale, which also can be upregulating to the sympathetic nervous system. And you'll notice for most of you an outward gaze, which is also part of sympathetic activation. It's a good pose to choose for people who feel some dysthymia or depression, because it will raise the sympathetic activation just a little bit. I don't know if any of you noticed that. So I think we can all take a breath now and let that go. And we're going to move on to another pose, the full forward bend. Don't do it yet, though. We're going to be doing it together slowly. So you can inhale now. And as you exhale, you can slowly bring the torso down halfway to the thighs. Now, if you have uncontrolled high blood pressure, heart disease, or head or neck injuries, please hold the pose there. Otherwise, you can let the torso descend as far as is comfortable for you, finally letting it rest on your thighs if it reaches down that far. And you can also release your head and neck. Continuing to breathe. You can hold the breath, hold the pose for 2 breaths. Always monitoring your body sensations, noticing if the pose is still comfortable, always being willing to get out of, come out of the pose if it feels uncomfortable. Okay, and after your second exhale, you can slowly bring the head back in line with the spine, and then slowly bring the torso back to a vertical position. And take a breath. The breath offers a little bit of time for the nervous system to settle in its current state of regulation. So this pose is designed to release tension in the muscles, to allow for a diffuse focus with the eyes. There's nothing that you have to focus on, and can promote an internal focus. And these are all characteristics of parasympathetic nervous system activation or increase of that parasympathetic tone. And that is very beneficial for people who are anxious and help bring down that level of sympathetic arousal into a more balanced state. And I just wanted to mention that in this system, it isn't necessary to use these poses if you're working with yoga with a client. Almost any backward or forward bending pose will regulate the autonomic nervous system in a similar way. So the choice can be based on the client's comfort level with certain poses, with the therapist's knowledge of the effects of certain poses, and so the client's preferences can be honored, which is beneficial because it may mean that the client will be willing to do the pose more on their own if they like it, if they like the way it feels. So everything I'm teaching is a choice, which is a very important characteristic of trauma-sensitive yoga, to empower the individual and not to be didactic in the way that pose is taught, although it is necessary to be clear as far as how to get into the pose. So we're shifting to an awareness of the breath. In one full deep breath, the individual can experience the entire range of arousal of the autonomic nervous system, from the highest sympathetic arousal to the lowest parasympathetic tone. And the activation of the sympathetic branch, which I've mentioned, happens on the inhale, and the increase of parasympathetic tone happens at the bottom of the exhale. That's where the greatest activation of parasympathetic tone is. So it's very beneficial if postures and breathing practices work together with the vagus to regulate the system. I'm going to move to another slide. Lateral twists can encourage a deep inhalation just prior to twisting, which stimulates the sympathetic nervous system slightly. And then, as one twists, there's an emphasis on a deep exhale, particularly at the bottom of the twist, which compresses the vagus to its maximum extent and increases parasympathetic tone. And an example is the half spinal twist here. We're not going to do all the poses, but I wanted to give you some examples. So side bends can offer more space in the rib cage on the side which is being stretched, which allows for a deeper inhale there, enhancing sympathetic nervous system upregulation, which again would be beneficial for someone who is feeling depressed, lethargic. And this is a kind of a double gift, because sometimes after taking a deeper inhale, the exhale can be deeper also. So that would enhance parasympathetic tone and have a balancing effect from this posture. So that's another possibility. So all of the postures that I suggest, done with an awareness of the breath and of the body sensations, train the autonomic nervous system in present awareness, which is inherently regulating. So that's really the secret here, is for the posture, no matter what it is, to be done with one's conscious awareness on the movements and the breath. And I think that's where yoga gets its magic, because if someone is simply doing the movement and their mind is somewhere else, then it's more like exercise, and there isn't that much effect on not only on the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, but also on neuroplasticity of the brain, because we're working to retrain patterns of neural patterns also in these practices. So this is not proven experimentally, but my hope and my wish is that as someone, for example, in trauma therapy, who becomes very overactivated, either sympathetically or parasympathetically, as the therapist works with them over a period of time, as they may also attend trauma-sensitive yoga classes, their autonomic nervous system, the pattern changes, and the neural network patterns change also in the brain. So over a period of time, it may become easier to become re-regulated at different times. So we're still on the physical level of yoga. And I just wanted to mention that there's another yoga practice that we're not going to do today called Yoga Nidra, which is also called the yogic sleep, which initially enhances the awareness of the vagus nerve by tracing its route through the body, and then instructs a tensing and relaxing of the major muscle groups in the body, which work with the cranial nerves to further regulate the autonomic nervous system. And once the system is regulated, the individual may be better able to process traumatic memories without losing that regulation. So we're moving toward the end of the presentation now. I just want to introduce a couple of more concepts. One of them is that on the energetic level, leaving the physical level, moving to the energetic, the yoga practices influence the flow of prana, which is similar to the concept of qi in Chinese medical system, which translates as life energy. And prana flows through a web of subtle energy channels called nadis, which interpenetrate the physical body and partially guide its physiological functions. So in a correspondence with Western science, the three major nadis are described in the Upanishads in similar ways as our current understanding of sympathetic, parasympathetic activation and their oscillation. And I'm also recommending that you try the yogic 3-part deep breath, but we don't have time to do that right now. So I just want to mention that finally, there's the elemental level of yoga, which I mentioned earlier, which focuses on something called the gunas, which the Bhagavad Gita defines as the qualities of all matter. There are 3 of them. And in my own re-examination of yoga philosophy some years ago, I discovered that they are described similarly as the sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, and the oscillating balance between the two. So here's another correspondence between the two systems. At the time, I thought this material was too far out to present in my training programs, so I didn't. So I was shocked and delighted in 2018 when I discovered a research article which described the same theory. It was titled Yoga Therapy and Polyvagal Theory, the Convergence of Traditional Wisdom and Contemporary Neuroscience for Self-Regulation and Resilience. And it was published with physical therapist and yoga therapist Marlisa Sullivan as the lead researcher and Dr. Stephen Porges as one of the contributors. So I definitely found validation for mentioning that in my courses. So thank you so much. I think we're out of time. And I just wanted to mention that, that I go into a lot more detail in a lot of these areas in my book. So I'm happy to take questions now. So I'm going to stop my share. I have to talk about it to make sure I get it right. And yeah, so.
Thank you so much, Joann.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so we'll take questions now. So a reminder, you can use the reactions button to raise your hand, which will put a hand there, or you can wave at us. Or you can ask your question in the chat. You can type it out. Yeah, Dory, you can start us off.
Hey, Joann, thanks so much for that presentation. I'm really curious what you do with people who have global high in their system. I'm a yoga teacher and I also have global high. And I find sometimes my system responds the opposite way to what's been taught, or so I'm just wondering how you work with that, and how the yoga, like if you're doing a forward fold and someone gets more activated, or vice versa, how would you work with that?
Yeah. Well, the theories I presented today are general theories. Each person has their own individual responses. So it's always more important to observe your own client and take into consideration what their experiences have been. There's some pose which can be, like physiologically, obviously regulating for the sympathetic nervous system. But if the person had been abused in a certain position, that pose is similar to, then they're going to become more activated rather than less. So, I am somewhat trained in somatic experiencing, but not entirely trained. So I know what global activation is, but I have not actually worked with it. I have to be honest. So, I think it's valuable for the client to simply learn how to be aware of what their body's messages are. I like to move very slowly when I'm teaching postures. For example, teaching, I don't know if you can all visualize, but the spinal twist that I showed a slide of earlier, where you just slowly twist to the side. Well, rather than twisting all the way, I might instruct a client to twist 1 inch to the right and stop and see what kinds of body experiences they have. And then if there's a lot of material there, whatever it is, you can stop there. Like the purpose of the pose may have been fulfilled by bringing up certain body sensations that the client may not have felt before. But then if the client somehow easily resolves them and wants to go on, they can twist another inch and learn a lot about their responses as they go along. But so with my current level of knowledge, I would also say that if certain postures are having a paradoxical effect, then I would not continue them. I just would look at what the client is actually experiencing in that moment.
Thank you. Any other questions? I guess I have a question. It would be how much time would you use these poses during a session, or how do you use them?
That's a great question. I would use a pose when someone, like I'm assuming a psychotherapeutic framework. I know there are a lot of other frameworks, but when I see the client's signs that the client's nervous system is becoming more dysregulated, then I would gently point that out, in a non-threatening way. Something like, gee, if let's say they're talking about an upsetting situation, I say, gee, it seems like, you're a little bit upset, your voice changed, or, your breathing pattern looks a little bit more, more shallow. And would you be willing to do a a somatic intervention right now to bring you back into a more regulated state, so you can, go on with this, with the session and feel more comfortable, or something to that effect. I would do that over and over again. It's another aspect of trying to retrain the autonomic nervous system to get a little bit less dysregulated as time goes on, and the therapy goes on, so it feels more manageable. Yeah.
And do you ever use it at the beginning of a session as like a way to ground, or to center?
Well, I definitely would do that in a similar way that I did it here.
Yeah.
Like look around the room, feel the contact between the back of the body and the chair. That's as far as I would go in the beginning of the session. I'd wait until there seemed to be some reason for bringing in a particular pose. Yeah, but in a yoga therapy context, that would be different. I'm a yoga therapist also, and yoga therapy focuses more on postures and breathing practices. So I'd probably start with a more extended, a yogic experience in that way. Yeah.
And then work with what emerges.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So it's a little bit of a regulator to bring yoga, and it's a little bit of a catalyst also, or it can be.
Mm-hmm.
So I notice it's a little quiet, and I'm not sure if that's because this material is all new, or if it's so confusing it's hard to understand, or if it seems it's so obvious that there aren't any questions. I'm curious about that. So I'm asking you some questions. How does this register for you? Or how was it to do these practices? Does anyone have anything they want to say about that?
Yeah, Dana.
Hi, Joanne. Thank you so much for your talk. And I'm mostly familiar with the information that you shared. And at the same time, it was really lovely to hear the way you articulated all the information very clearly. And I found it to be very understandable. I'm a yoga therapist, and as I move into my study of counseling now, I'm curious about how you might work with a client who perhaps can't feel in their body, or who is, so disembodied or in a dissociated state that it's a challenge to even begin there. What strategy might you use in that situation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I like to get the client's permission, or to work somatically, because I feel that to get a conscious agreement to do that. And if the client for some reason really doesn't want to, then I would not pursue that with that person. Just want to make that clear. And I feel that I like my clients to feel success. That's important to me. So I might start with something so simple that the client would be able to feel that they could do it. And so I might start not with a yoga posture or breathing practice, but just like extending and folding one finger, and describe what that feels like, if they can. Like, do you feel, or even ask questions. Do you feel any skin tightening as you bend the finger? Whatever questions I could think of. And so to start off very small and see what happens. It requires some imagination also. Like, I remember one of my trainees said that one of her clients didn't want to participate in any breathing practices, but she had a cat that she really loved. So I thought this was so clever of the therapist to say, well, why don't you go home and breathe with your cat? Notice how your cat breathes. And so that worked. So, I think, in some cases there aren't any global answers to your question, but rather just a sensitivity to the client, and gentleness, acceptance, and seeing what you can do.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few comments in the chat we could read out.
Okay.
The first one, I don't know, is it Gunter? He says, I work as a principal in a middle school with children who have experienced the war in Syria and Ukraine. The yoga exercises help me to prepare myself for the job at school in the morning. It helps me to be more present myself. Thank you for linking to the polyvagal theory.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think for someone who is regulated, you can do any pose that you like. It's a wonderful exploration of different shapes that the body can get into and different degrees of strength. But for people who are traumatized, it's important to be much more selective. So I'm really glad to hear that yoga helps you. And I imagine you have your favorite poses. Do you have a routine, or is it sort of different every day? Yeah.
You want to respond?
Yes. No, I have not a routine. I have make it in the last 3 years every morning between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and I noticed that I changed my presence. I changed my body, and I'm more relaxed if I go to the school and so on, and yes, and more I try to link it with the polyvagal theory, and I see there are a lot of I don't know what I see a lot of yes, ich muss es in Deutsch sagen, vielleicht ist einer da, der Deutsch spricht. Ich kenne sehr viele Verknüpfungen zwischen der polyvagal Theorie and the yoga practice.
Yeah. I'm glad you switched. Yeah, I'm glad you switched to your native language. That made a lot of sense.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody can translate, but anyway.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, so you know, this, I don't know if this all seems very simple to you, but I think it is rather simple to take very basic yoga practices and shapes and apply them to re-regulating the autonomic nervous system. It's not that complicated. I think, you know, a lot of a person's own experience with yoga, though, will come through in the way they teach it and introduce it and be with the client. So your own yoga practices are important if you're interested in doing this kind of work. And the field is wide open. You know, I think my book, and there's maybe one or two other books on this topic, and that's all there is right now. So
I think Ariel, right? Ariel Schwartz has written.
she has one.
She has
Right.
quite a bit of work around the same. Yeah.
Yeah, she has a new book.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And sorry, I see in the classroom that the children has not much problems to do this posing, this simple posing. It's dependent whether the teacher is very present and make by herself or itself this posing. Yes, and the children has no problem. I see that every day in the classroom, just for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and they like it to do that.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the power of social engagement, which shows through in the presence of the teacher. That's a lot of the healing and the willingness also of the kids to do it.
And the co-regulation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like your example with breathing with her cat. That's co-regulating with a living attachment that this person has, where they feel really safe. So then it feels good. Yeah.
Well, safety is really the key word.
Safety is the key word. Yeah. And I love the way you talked about this little finger movement, and really so much honoring, you know, what we've learned too, right, in polyvagal theory, that, you know, not being in the body is adaptive when it's not safe. And when we normalize that and validate that for our clients, the same thing with addiction, not being in the body, avoiding that and shutting that down and using addictive behaviors to manage that, to keep that going, that numb dissociated state. It makes perfect sense when you understand the context. And that's such a gift to our clients. So I love the way I can feel your gentleness and respect around that, how to be really careful about inviting that connection with the body. Yeah,
thank you.
Beautiful.
And I guess we could take Diane's comment in the chat. She shared how she uses Pilates for a sympathetic release, and then finds that the yoga practice is more for parasympathetic engagement. Sorry.
Well,
she shared.
I
Yeah.
think there's some truth to that, yeah, yoga really excels at bringing down the sympathetic arousal.
Mm. Yeah.
So, Jan, did you want to talk about Michael?
I just wanted, yeah, when we're closing, just to say, so thank you so much, Joanne. That was really great. Really, really helpful.
Mm.
And we've ended up somehow, in timing wise, we have another one of these next week. It's supposed to be once a month, but sometimes it's hard to coordinate everybody's schedule. So especially in the summer. So Michael was available next week, and so we went for it. So next Thursday, July 7th, is that right, Annette? At 1 o'clock Eastern time. Michael Allison is going to join us, and he is going to talk about regaining control of our physiology to optimize our human experience. Michael actually facilitates another one of the groups, like our group, on, I think it's wellness, health and wellness.
Mm.
So it should also be very interesting, and we hope that you'll come next week. And you can also check out all of these. You'll get a recording, and all of the recordings are listed on the group page, even though they're not easy now to find, but they are there and they're worth looking for. So we're really developing a library, which is pretty cool when you think about it. Anybody else interested in presenting? We have what's happening in August. September, Joya de Cruz is coming to talk about something we've touched on here today too, how to help clients to ground outside of the body. Fascinating stuff. And Joya is a really wonderful focusing oriented therapist. She's worked a lot with complex trauma. What's happening in August? Is there somebody?
Not right now.
Oh, that's why I didn't remember. If anybody would like to come and join us and do a presentation, we would love that. Really, to just hope you can feel comfortable enough in the group. You could even just try something out, something that you haven't tried anywhere else. I think we can talk about safety, but we can also create enough safety that we can take a few risks with each other here and really use this space to support each other. So, because it's hard work that we do.
Mm.
We need to support each other in this. So really hope that you'll come next week. And again, thank you so much, Joanne, for sharing. It was very generous and really helpful and informative.
Yeah, thank you so much.
How to be with the body in a safe way.
Mm.
Okay, well, we do this. This is Steve's goodbye and thank you very much. None of us would be here without Steve.
Mm.
Wonderful Steve Porges. Amazing. Okay, be well and safe, and see you soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.